The Apostolic Age of the history of Christianity is traditionally the period of the 12 Apostles, dating from the Great Commission of the Apostles by the resurrected Jesus in Jerusalem c. 33 until the death of the last apostle, believed to be John the Apostle in Anatolia c. 100. Traditionally, the apostles are believed to have dispersed from Jerusalem, founding the apostolic sees. It holds special significance in Christian tradition as the age of the direct apostles of Jesus Christ. The major primary source for the Apostolic Age is the Acts of the Apostles, but its historical accuracy is questioned by some. According to most scholars, the followers of Jesus were composed principally from apocalyptic Jewish sects during the late Second Temple period of the 1st century. Some early Christian groups were strictly Jewish, such as the Ebionites and the early church leaders in Jerusalem, collectively called Jewish Christians. During this period, they were led by James the Just. According to Acts chapter 9 verses 1-2, they describe themselves as disciples of the Lord and followers of the way. And according to Acts chapter 11 verse 26, a settled community of disciples at Antioch were the first to be called Christians. Paul of Tarsus, commonly known as St. Paul, persecuted the early Jewish Christians, such as St. Stephen, then converted and adopted the title of Apostle to the Gentiles, and started proselytizing among the Gentiles. He persuaded the leaders of the Jerusalem church to allow Gentile converts exemption from most Jewish commandments at the Council of Jerusalem. According to the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church, Paul's influence on Christian thinking is more significant than any other New Testament author. However, the relationship of Paul of Tarsus and Judaism is still disputed today. After the destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70 during the First Jewish-Roman War, or at the latest following the Bar Kokhba revolt of 132, Jerusalem ceased to be the center of the Christian church. Its bishops became suffragans of the Metropolitan Bishop of Caesarea. In the 2nd century, Christianity established itself as a predominantly Gentile religion that spanned the Roman Empire and beyond. Significance: the apostolic period between the years 30 and 100 produced writings attributed to the immediate followers of Jesus Christ. The period is traditionally associated with the apostles, hence the tags Apostolic Times and Apostolic Writings. The early church associated the New Testament books with the apostles. Modern, liberal scholarship has cast doubt on the authorship of some New Testament books. However, most accept that the New Testament books were written during this period. In the traditional history of the Christian Church, the Apostolic Age was the foundation of the Church's history. The Apostolic Age is particularly significant in Restorationism, which claims that the period exhibited a purer form of Christianity that should be restored to the Church as it exists today. The unique character of the New Testament writings, and the period of origin, is highlighted by the paucity of their literary form in later writing. Once the canon of the New Testament began to take shape, the style ceased to be used on a regular basis. Non-canonical writings persisted, but died out within a historically short period of time. Early patristic literature is dominated by apologetics and makes use of other literary forms borrowed from non-Christian sources. Early leaders: the relatives of Jesus lived in Nazareth since the 1st century. Some of them were prominent early Christians. Among those named in the New Testament are his mother and 4 of his brothers: James, Simeon, Joseph and Jude. According to the Gospels, some of the family opposed the mission and religion of Jesus. The relatives of Jesus were accorded a special position within the early church, as displayed by the leadership of James in Jerusalem. According to 19th-century German theologian F.C. or early Christianity was dominated by the conflict between Peter, who was law-observant, and Paul, who advocated partial or even complete freedom from the law. Later findings contradicted this hypothesis. The allegedly continuous conflict was not supported by the available evidence. However, theological conflict between Paul and Peter is recorded in the New Testament and was widely discussed in the early church. Marcion and his followers stated that the polemic against false apostles in Galatians was aimed at Peter, James and John, the pillars of the church, as well as the false gospels circulating through the churches at the time. Irenaeus and Tertullian argued against Marcionism's elevation of Paul and stated that Peter and Paul were equals among the apostles. Passages from Galatians were used to show that Paul respected Peter's office and acknowledged a shared faith. Scholar James E. G. Dunn has proposed that Peter was the bridge man between the two other prominent leaders, Paul and James the Just. Paul and James were both heavily identified with their own brands of Christianity. Peter showed a desire to hold on to his Jewish identity. In contrast with Paul, he simultaneously showed a flexibility towards the desires of the broader Christian community, in contrast to James' Jewish background. According to modernist higher criticism scholars who emerged since the 18th century in Protestant Europe, early Christianity was a Jewish eschatological faith. The Book of Acts reports that the early followers continued daily temple attendance and traditional Jewish home prayer. Other passages in the New Testament Gospels reflect a similar observance of traditional Jewish piety such as fasting, reverence for the Torah and observance of Jewish holy days. The earliest form of Jesus religion is best understood in this context. However, there was great diversity in local variations, as each succeeded or failed in different ways. Regardless, Jesus was a pious Jew, worshipping the Jewish God, preaching interpretations of Jewish law and accepted as the Jewish Messiah by his disciples. Proponents of higher criticism claim that regardless of how one interprets the mission of Jesus, that he must be understood in context as a first-century Palestinian Jew. Orthodox and Catholic Christianity, including the Church Fathers, on the other hand, tend to place a sharp distinction between Israel and the Pharisees, as well as placing a central focus on his divine nature. Religious climate. The religious climate of first-century Judea was quite diverse, with numerous variations of Judaic doctrine, many attempts to establish an ideal holy community, and divergent ideas about Israel's future hopes. Modern scholars place normative rabbinic Judaism after the time of Jesus. See also School of Jamnia. The Pharisees were but one sect and did not have the overwhelming influence in first-century Judea traditionally attributed to them. The ancient historian Josephus noted four prominent groups in the Judaism of the time: Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes and Zealots. Jesus dealt with a variety of sects, most prominently discussing the law with Pharisees and debating about bodily resurrection with the Sadducees. Jesus also directly associated with John the Baptist, who is often associated with the Essenes. Relationship with the Essenes. Scholars such as James Tabor state that Essenes and early Christians had a number of similar beliefs. The Essenes practiced baptism, believed in a new covenant, were messianic and believed themselves a remnant of the faithful, preparing the way for the reign of God's glory. They called their group by names that would later be used by Christians, such as the Way and the Saints. Jesus preached a number of doctrines similar to Essena Halacha. They followed a charismatic leader who was opposed and possibly killed at the instigation of the Pharisees. John the Baptist seems to have risen out of this context. Some scholars, such as Carsten Peter Theda, dispute this presentation. Early Christian leaders did not have to visit Qumran to have heard of Essena beliefs and read their texts. The various Jewish groups, including Christians and Essenes, were interconnected and simultaneously adopted some practices and beliefs while rejecting others. While some similarities exist, there are many differences, and similar parallels can be also drawn between the early Christians and Pharisees, and other Jewish sects. Many features of Christian faith have no parallels in the texts from Qumran, and some that do are fundamentally distinct from Essena practices and beliefs. Notably, John's act of penitent baptism bears little resemblance to the daily baptismal ritual of the Essenes. First Gentile converts. The Roman centurion Cornelius of Caesarea Maritima is traditionally considered the first Gentile convert. His conversion, as documented in Acts chapter 10, carries great significance. Cornelius was referenced by both Peter and James in arguing for the inclusion of Gentiles in the Council of Jerusalem. His conversion is broadly considered to have been the beginning of a broader mission to the Gentiles, who would come to eclipse the Jews among Christians. The story of Cornelius' conversion is thematically connected with, and parallels, the conversion stories of the Samaritans, Paul of Tarsus and an Ethiopian eunuch in Luke Acts. The Ethiopian was an outsider and castrated, whose presence in worship assembly would have been prohibited under the Mosaic law. This is consistent with the theme of Luke, advocating a universal faith and mission. Ethiopia was considered in antiquity to be the southernmost end of the world. Thus, the Ethiopian's conversion can also be interpreted as a partial fulfillment of the mission presented in Acts chapter 1 to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. Some scholars assert that the Ethiopian eunuch was the first Gentile convert, stating that those resisting this conclusion are doing so to preserve the traditional interpretation of Cornelius as the first convert, regardless of the primacy of either convert. This episode relates Luke's view of how the gospel reached the ends of the earth, and the mission to the Gentiles was initiated. Circumcision controversy. Disputes over the Mosaic law generated intense controversy in early Christianity. This is particularly notable in the mid-1st century, when the circumcision controversy came to the fore. Alistair McGrath stated that many of the Jewish Christians were fully faithful religious Jews, only differing in their acceptance of Jesus as the Messiah. As such, they believed that circumcision and other requirements of the Mosaic law were required for salvation. The increasing number of Gentile converts came under pressure from Jewish Christians to be circumcised in accordance with Abrahamic tradition. The issue was addressed at the Council of Jerusalem, where St. Paul made an argument that circumcision was not a necessary practice, vocally supported by Peter, as documented in Acts chapter 15. This position received widespread support and was summarized in a letter circulated in Antioch. While the issue was theoretically resolved, it continued to be a recurring issue among Christians. 4 years after the Council of Jerusalem, Paul wrote to the Galatians about the issue, which had become a serious controversy in their region. There was a burgeoning movement of Judaizers in the area that advocated adherence to traditional Mosaic laws, including circumcision. According to McGrath, Paul identified James the Just as the motivating force behind the movement. Paul considered it a great threat to his doctrine of salvation through faith and addressed the issue with great detail in Galatians chapter 3. Apostolic Church in Jerusalem. In 66, the Jews revolted against Rome. Rome besieged Jerusalem for 4 years, and the city fell in 70. The city was destroyed, including the massive temple, and the population was mostly killed or removed. Though, according to Epiphanius of Salamis, the cenacle survived at least to Hadrian's visit in 130. A scattered population survived. Traditionally, it is believed the Jerusalem Christians waited out the Jewish-Roman wars in Pella and the Decapolis. The Sanhedrin reformed in Jamnia. Prophecies of the Second Temple's destruction are found in the Synoptics, and are part of the argument for supersessionism. After the Bar Kokhba revolt, Hadrian barred all Jews from Jerusalem, which was renamed Aelia Capitolina. Hence the subsequent Jerusalem bishops were Gentiles. Jerusalem received special recognition in Canon 7 of Nicaea in 325, without yet becoming a metropolitan see, and was later named as one of the Pentarchy, but the later was never accepted by the Church of Rome. St. Thomas Christians. Thomas the Apostle brought Christianity to the southern Indian Malabar coast, reputedly in 52 AD, and from this developed the St. Thomas Christian tradition or Thomasine Christianity. These Syrian Malabar Nazarene Christians maintained a unique Christian identity until the arrival of the Portuguese in the 17th century.